together, whether we're talking of public authorities, business people, or as members of civil society. We must accept responsibility and be fully accountable for our actions. And speaking to my colleagues in the business sector, who sometimes may say corruption is the cost of doing business, my reply is that corruption for the business sector means a worse bottom line. It means losing one's reputation. It also means going to jail, because now we have some laws in many countries to ensure that bribe payers do not continue to roam the world and add to the corruption equation. To us, a joint approach will magnify our impact. It will allow us to exchange experiences, coordinate our approach, and promote common standards, common indicators, and common programs. This means working together as development agencies, civil society organizations, internationally, and also, more importantly, with diverse stakeholders on the ground in the countries. Through our active network of chapters in the Americas and throughout the world, Transparency International produces a range of information about corruption in order to guide reform efforts. We also produce a number of programs, a number of tools to assist governments and business in the design and implementation of concrete reforms and monitor its implementation. For example, this coming May, we will publish the first edition of the Transparency in Political Finance Index, which will assess levels of accountability and transparency in political finance in 8 Latin American countries. This information will help assess strengths and weaknesses and assist stakeholders in the development of reforms. It's also important to raise public awareness, because social demands for transparency is essential if the anti-corruption agenda is to be sustained. The critical and independent voice of civil society must be heard from the beginning, since it can drive the process and mobilize broad public support to accompany reform. It's the voice of the people, and in meeting leaders across the world, I'm often told by them, I need organizations in my country that will weigh on the other side of the scale in terms of pushing our governments for transparency, for accountability, to continue to fight corruption, because there'll be many others who will try to prevent those reforms. And if I just have one side to look at, it's going to be very difficult for me to be able to make a dramatic change. Therefore, please be there, and of course, be helpful as well. There is a disturbing trend in that respect, a trend to regulate civil society, with a number of countries today around the globe enacting or proposing laws that significantly restrict the activities of civil society organizations. We're deeply concerned about this and about the freedom and protection of civil society and its ability to function without government interference. And we're talking here of responsible civil society organizations. And given the essential role of civil society in the fight against corruption, it's vital that the OAS takes a strong stand in support of civil society freedom to organize and operate without these types of restrictions. I can say that in one country, the current discussion is that any resources coming from outside of that country to support civil society organizations, and these could be humanitarian organizations delivering services, would have to be placed in a common fund managed by the government of that country. And then the government of that country would decide to allocate to those organizations that it sees fit. As I leave here today, I'm on my way to the first conference of state parties for the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, the first truly global anti-corruption convention. 140 countries have signed this convention, and 80 of these 80 countries have ratified to date, including 16 nations from the Americas. This is an achievement with tremendous potential, one that can build on this convention of the Americas. And I'm pleased to conclude that the light which was lit by our leaders of the Americas in 1994 continues to inspire reformers around the world. Thank you very much for your attention and for your warm welcome.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lavelle, for your analysis, for the richness of the information presented, and for the identification of the tremendous challenges we still confront in the Western Hemisphere. I would like to now open the floor to questions, comments. We have the opportunity to have Ms. Lavelle here with us, and please feel free to ask her any questions. Yes, please. Could you pass a microphone there in the middle of the room? And could you please identify yourself?
I'm Vito Tanzi. I was director of the Fiscal Affairs Department of the IMF, where the code of fiscal transparency was developed. My question is a very simple one. With all the activity of the Transparency International and all the international activities since 1995, why corruption is still increasing?
Thank you. Let me take a second question, Ms. Lavelle, and then you can have the floor. Ambassador Eels from Suriname, please.
Thank you very much. Let me thank Mrs. Lavelle for her splendid presentation, and it clarified a lot of things to me, but I still have a question. My question is very simple. Is the fight against corruption may be so difficult because corruption has so many different shapes in the various societies? The second question I have related to this one. You spoke about lobbyism. You mentioned only once in your presentation. Do you agree with me that lobbyism is a sophisticated form of corruption, or as I see it, lobbyism is corruption in a three-piece suit? Thank you.
Thank you for these questions. Let me go to the first one, because this is one that I'm often asked. Sometimes people say, is corruption worst to start with? And my only answer is, I don't know, because it is so opaque and it takes place under the table, and money moves so rapidly today just by a few clicks on that computer, and it goes through several countries. Why is it continuing is the second question, and one that you just asked. I think it relates to the point that has just been made by the ambassador, and that is that the gains to a number of the individuals involved is very often such that it drives that force. I remember meeting with Jerry John Rawlings, the president of Ghana, and asking him, what are your three priorities, Mr. President? He said, corruption, corruption, corruption. I said, no, 3. He said, that's it. And his answer was, I've just gotten 2 of my ministers put into jail. A third one came to see me last week. He was offered $2 million US in order for this firm to get this particular contract, which was a very big contract. So, this is one thing. The extent is there. The second point is that in countries where you don't have a strong judiciary, a strong justice system, and a transparent and well-working financial system as 2 important pillars, corruption will be much more prevalent because the transparency is not there. In certain countries, for example, there are confidential agreements between oil and gas and mining industry and the government. And sometimes the royalties, the concession fees, the taxes do not go into the main budget. They go into an off-budget reserve, which nobody knows about. And these, so this is another reason. And I said, and then those embedded networks, what we find is that they are not only resilient, but very difficult to get at, because they very often have the face of full legitimacy. Because this could be a law firm, it could be an accounting firm, assisting those transactions or finding legal ways of making those transactions happen. So that's why at Transparency International we press for transparency, because if the books are open for people to see, we press for information being given to the people in an accessible way so that they can see for themselves and hold their governments accountable. And we work with industry because it takes 2 to tango. And, by working with industry, we try to get the leaders of each of the sectors to come together and, develop pacts that they will not bribe. They will have a zero tolerance, and they'll work with their staff, with their subsidiaries, and sometimes even with their supply line to, come with different codes of conducts which would make a difference. So, it's still there, but at least and we find it in every country, but in countries where the judicial system, the financial system, and the parliament work with good oversight institutions, if something goes wrong, it's usually found, investigated, and brought to justice if there's enough evidence. And that's what you'd want to see around the world, hopefully, soon. In terms of whether there are, the different shades in society, and I would agree with you, there are. And at times I'm told, well, because people have low salaries, it's all right if they ask for a bribe to give a service. But when they ask for a bribe, it's most of the time to people that are poorer than they are. And therefore it feeds that vicious circle. But there are shades. And, some people ask me if I send a bouquet of flowers to the spouse of the minister at a time when I want to have a contract, is this close to the line? And I say, it is more than close to the line. It may not be big, but, you're trying to get a favor for a gain for yourself, and that's where the definition, I think, is important. If it's not for private gain, then it might be a real gift as opposed to trying to obtain that. In terms of lobbying, I think when you have to look at lobbyists within the whole political financing framework and support for elections. And when you begin to do that, you're able to make the difference between those who lobby on a particular cause or for a particular institutions, and those who are part, in a sense, of that embedded network that I was talking about, because you can have that. I think what we certainly recommend is that there be legislation ensuring that lobbyists have to not only register that they are lobbyists,